I would like to show you a very exciting Blitz game from the Norway Chess event, which has a fantastic lineup again with Magnus Carlsen and a lot of other big stars, but also some very young prodigies, including Gukesh from India. He's the upcoming man. And on the day this game was played, he just turned 17 years old. He's playing with the black pieces against Anish Giri. It's a blitz game because this Norway chess event has the tradition to kick off with a blitz tournament among these 10 players. Let's have a look what happens in the blitz game. And the reason I decided to show you this game is I believe there are a lot of interesting tactical moments. So let's get started. Anish opens here the game with 1 e4. It's a Sicilian defense. After knight f3, knight c6. It's the open variation. And after c takes d4, knight takes d4, Gukesh goes for e6. And after knight c3, queen c7, we have here the starting position of the Sicilian Taimanov. It's considered to be one of the more reliable systems within the Sicilian, leading to positional but also to very sharp play. But the good thing is that black has a very solid formation and it will be difficult for white to break through. Let's have a look. Bishop e3, one of the sharper continuations, developing the bishop. And now, after black goes a6 to prepare later on b7, b5 to generate some active play on the queen side, white goes queen f3. It's one of the modern variations, bringing the queen out. And even though it may not be very clear what the queen is going to do yet, one of the main plans, of course, is to castle queenside. Black goes knight f6. And now castling queenside as announced. And here Gukesh goes for the move knight e5, attacking the queen. And the queen comes over to g3. This is still pretty standard theory. As the queen is opposing the knight cannot really move, as then the queen on c7 will be hanging. And now the queen on g3 has also another idea, because after black's thematical move b7, b5, now the path for the f-pawn has been cleared, and it's white's turn to kick the knight away from the center, from its nice post on e5, and the knight comes in to g4, attacking the bishop, and it would be great news to aim for simplifications. If black does get a chance to capture the bishop, that would definitely make its task easier. And therefore white is going to move its bishop away. There are two interesting options. The move bishop g1 may look a little bit strange because now the rook is out of play, at least for the moment. But very soon the move h3 will be played, after which the knight needs to go away. But the other option is to stay more centrally with your bishop. So the bishop stays on d2. But now black goes for the move b4, kicking the knight away from the c3 square, and knight a4 played. So it seems as if the pawn on e4 is hanging. But if you do take that pawn, knight takes e4, it's queen takes g4, you capture that knight. And if you are thinking there is this option to play queen f2 with a super fork, just don't forget that white still has the move queen f3. Rook is hanging and the knight as well, so white will keep its material advantage. So therefore, before taking the pawn on e4, it's very important that black supports that knight on g4. And therefore, the move h5 is considered to be the best option now. Now, of course, knight takes e4 is a serious threat. You don't want to lose that pawn. And therefore, bishop d3 played. Still, pretty much well-known theory for both players. And in most cases, black players have decided to go here for the move d5, trying to strike in the center, and with the idea that after the move e5 you can land with your knight on e4. This is still very sharp theory. There's a lot to be said here, but it didn't happen, so let's not focus on that. Let's see what happened in the game as black played the very logical developing move bishop b7, reintroducing the threat of taking the pawn on e4. And rather than protecting that pawn immediately, Giri goes for h3, forcing the knight from g4 to go to an inferior square. Has to go back to h6. This looks very strange. If you see this for the first time, pawn on h5, a knight on h6. In the Sicilian Taimanov, especially in this variation, it's not such a crazy thing. Of course, castling kingside for black will not be that attractive later on, but at the moment, the king is relatively safe in the middle of the board and white still needs to find a way to open up the files to start targeting that king. Pawn on e4 is still under threat, so a move like rook h e1 overprotecting the pawn makes a lot of sense. But Giri goes for the alternative, queen e1, which also does support the pawn on e4 one more time. But in the meantime, the queen also keeps an eye on the pawn on b4. Very interesting move. And here, black plays remarkable move, h4. But there's a clear idea behind it, because positionally speaking, it's very nice to have such a pawn on h4, fixing the pawn on h3 and the pawn on g2. They cannot really move efficiently because of the en passant idea. If you do take the pawn on h4, there is knight takes e4, as the queen is no longer covering that pawn on e4, and such an exchange of a flank pawn for a central pawn would be excellent news. The knight is doing very well. We have a nice pawn center. We can develop our bishop. Maybe even the move d7, d5 can be played. And thanks to that knight on e4, black does have a very nice grip in the center. So taking the pawn on h4 is not recommended. But also, if white would decide to take the pawn on b4, white capturing the other flank pawn after bishop takes b4, queen takes b4, black does capture the pawn on e4. And once again, we are about to play d7, d5 with a nice grip in the center thanks to the control over the d5 and e4 squares. So rather than capturing a pawn yet, Giri plays here the useful waiting move, king b1. King is always in the Sicilian slightly better placed, protecting all its free pawns, going out from potential problems along the c-file. And now Gukesh played here the move rook b8, which is a very interesting idea, as you would probably have expected the rook to go to c8, but objectively the rook is not doing that much, as the pawn on c2 is well defended by the knight and the bishop. But with rook b8, you're placing your rook on a closed file, but the main idea is that now, whenever white is going to take on b4, bishop takes b4, queen takes b4, you do have bishop takes e4 with an immediate threat against the queen on b4. Therefore, the pawn on b4 is likely not to be captured anytime soon. What is white going to do instead? Anish played here the move rook to f1. Maybe there are ideas of trying to break in the center, either with a timed e5 or maybe even with the move f5 very soon. Bishop e7 played. The bishop is doing not that much, but it's a solid move, and you do give black the potential option of castling at some point if you would like to do that. But here, white needs to figure out what to do next. Well, I mentioned already the potential pawn breaks, but if you play here a move like f5, hoping to open up the files, black will try to keep things closed with the move e5, and then it's not clear at all what the rook is going to do on f1. Even if you would consider the move e5 here, that will enable the knight to come into d5, and that is an excellent spot for the knight. Everything is under control here for black. What is the best way of playing? That is very difficult to say. With the help of the engines, of course, we can come to the right conclusions, but the best move here for white is just a waiting move like b2, b3. How on earth can you come up with such a move in a blitz game? Well, in a way, it's very logical that you overprotect your knight on a4. The knight will never get into trouble, and if needed, it can drop back via b2 into the game, maybe later on to c4 even. Also, the big question is, what is black going to do in the meantime? Well, let me show you. If you're intending to castle, then the problem is the pawn on h4 can finally be taken, as now taking on e4 cannot be recommended as the bishop on e7 is hanging. Therefore, castling kingside just leads to a loss of a pawn. And that is a very important pawn. Very soon the queen will come back, and white can even introduce ideas like g4, g5 with a crushing attack, but also attacking these vulnerable knights on f6 and h6. So now, after the move b3, this was not played in the game, just one more interesting idea. If you do play d5, white's going to respond with e5. Very important idea. And if you jump in with the knight to e4, then that knight can be taken, d takes e4, and now bishop takes b4, queen takes b4, does win a pawn as well. Because, look, in the other lines, white had a pawn still on e4, and then there is bishop takes e4, and you do regain the pawn, but obviously you're not allowed, and you don't really want to capture your own pawns. Let's go back to the game. As Anish thought about a different plan, he wanted to play for an attack, and played here the move g4, with a clear idea of playing g5, hitting both knights. But black's plan was meeting this move with capturing on g3. Now after queen takes g3, white's queen becomes active and is hitting the pawn on g7. But look what Gukesh played. He just decided to take the pawn on e4. This must have been seen by Giri, but he definitely kind of miscalculated something. If you would take the knight on e4, bishop takes e4, black is a pawn up. And in case you are planning to go queen takes g7, hitting the rook on h8, if the rook goes to g8, then you can take the knight on h6. But the key move here is to go rook h7. And everything is still perfectly covered, as this bishop on e4 is a monster. It's protecting the rook, and it's at the same time attacking the pawn on c2. Now the queen would have to move away, and then you go bishop f6 with the idea of eliminating that knight so that later on you can take on c2 with a threat against the king, as well as that knight on a4, which is completely out of play. Black is much better in such a scenario. So therefore, Giri decided not to take with his bishop on e4, and instead he decided to take immediately. Now, of course, the rook is still under threat, and if you play rook h7, you can just take it. There's no bishop covering that square. If you go rook g8, well, the knight on h6 can be taken. So that doesn't work. But what did Anish miss here? There is this move bishop f6. I like this motive so much because everything is protected. Bishop protects the rook, rook protects the knight, knight protects the bishop. Fantastic harmony between black's pieces. And now the queen got to go back. And think about it, knight on d4, which is under threat. Therefore, the queen went back to g1. And now the queen on g1 is a very poor piece. It has the responsibility of protecting the knight on d4. Let's try to attack the defender. Therefore, rook g8 played. The queen is under threat. There are hardly any squares to go to. You don't want to lose that knight on d4. Therefore, queen e3 played. The queen still protects the knight, but the next move is rook to g3. And now the queen is in trouble. If the queen moves, the knight will be taken. If you block on f3, trying to offer the exchange of rooks, then there is knight takes d2 with check. Rook takes d2, and now, once again, you can just take on d4. This time the queen has also the defensive responsibility over the rook. The queen is under threat. If you do take back on d4, it's bishop takes f3, and black is just a full rook up. Therefore, Giri decided to drop back with its knight to f3, but now the knight from h6 finally comes back into the game. That's the consequence. Now you're no longer having a pawn on e4. The knight comes into f5, and look at the position compared with a few moves back. These knights are absolute monsters. The queen is stuck, would have to move now. It went back to e1. So white is actually threatening to take on e4. But do you see here the killer move for black? A lot of tactics, and that's of course the result of very nice positional sound chess. All black's pieces are nicely concentrated in the center, and there's a tactic. Don't take on d2 immediately with the plan that if white's going to recapture, the knight on f3 can be taken. But white still has the defensive move knight takes d2, and okay, black is in good shape, but the game continues. Instead, rook takes f3 is the typical attacking motive. If you have a good idea and it doesn't work, check if you can reverse the move order. That's the case here. Now after taking on f3, rook takes f3, it's time to take on d2 with check. opening up the diagonal for the bishop so that after white recaptures, there is bishop takes f3. Material speaking, black is a piece up, but the line is not over yet. Bishop takes f5. White regains the piece because black is unable to take back on f5. That is simply not allowed since the e-pawn is pinned. Now, let's have a look at this position. Material speaking, it's even, but White's position is just absolutely hopeless. You can even just take the pawn on f4. That is good enough, but there is one other fantastic idea here. A tactical shot. Let's see if you can find it. Bishop c3, played by Gukesh, which is a huge blow to White's position. As you're attacking the rook cannot move as the queen is hanging. And if you do take with a pawn on c3, there is b takes c3. And look, this rook on b8 is coming alive. It was on a closed file, but now the file is open. It's check. The king got to go away. If the king goes to c1, you can take the rook on d2. But much stronger even here is the move queen to b7 with a devastating mating threat on b1. If you do take on c3, then it's queen b2 with checkmate. Beautiful line. Therefore, the king will have to go to the other corner. Can go to a1, but then let's just keep it simple. C takes d2, we grab the material, attacking the queen. If you do take back, position is hopeless, but the easiest move here for black is the move queen c4 with a double attack, unprotected piece. If the knight goes somewhere, there will follow queen f1 and the king is caught in a mating net. Therefore, Anish didn't capture on c3, decided to move the bishop from d3. But anyway, it's just a game over. After queen takes f4, Giri had seen enough. He captured the pawn. The threat against the rook just remains. You're just about to take on d2 when you are a full rook up. And yeah, still, if you do take on c3, it is b takes c3 with check. The rook will be taken next by the pawn. Then the pawn attacks the queen and threatens to be promoted. So therefore, Gukesh won this game. I thought this was a fantastic illustration of a typical miscalculation, which was initiated by this move g4. Giri thought that he could become very active with his queen, but probably he missed it after knight takes e4, queen takes g7. Black still had his move bishop f6, protecting everything, and at the same time, black is just about to take over by initiating new threats against white's pieces. Do you find this tactical example very instructive? Just make sure you like this video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more awesome content like this. See you next time.